All right, hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Same Storm, Different Boat. We are happy to be speaking with Al Bertani and Pam George, friends of ours from the Chicago area, both in the education world. Dr. Bertani is a longtime friend. We've known each other for 50 years, all the way back to high school. Pam was an administrator in the Chicago School District. Al was a muckety-muck in the school district, working with administrators to become better directors of kids' education. So lots to share from these two people. So welcome. Thank you for joining us for one of our conversations. It's great to have you.
Thanks for inviting us.
We appreciate it.
I like being in a muckety-muck.
I was like, what?
He's mucked with the best.
Muckety muck.
Yeah, mucked with the best of them.
Dr. Bertani. So I get first question, because both of you know the size and scope of the Chicago School District so well. Give us some insight on the massive effort that must be going on to think about retooling to homeschooling and some of the feedback that you've gotten from people trying to adapt to what's going on right now.
It really has been a massive effort. It was on a moment's turn to something we've never done before. The bottom line was always about making sure that kids were taken care of, that they knew we were still there for them as educators and mentors and coaches and just important people in their lives. We see them every day for long stretches of time, and they matter to us. And we had to some way convey that across platforms just like this. But the challenge for us was it hadn't been done before. And there's press out there that says, oh, some schools were ready, some schools weren't, to do this online learning plan. Well, that was intended for a short term, maybe a snow day, a broken pipe, an emergency of some kind. But now we're talking an extended period of time. So we had to then say, okay, how do we not only show our care and connection with kids, but also figure out what and how do we help them learn? And that was a complete mind shift, because when you're working with students, they're right here with you. Now they're at a distance in a different setting, in a different group. Some a little techie, some not, some parents who are that aren't. And we had to try to still convey those critical things across the screen without, just being playtime, which is tempting. You could just play. We really wanted to care and to learn together.
Let me try to add a couple of context pieces, because your question goes down the path of size and scope. You have to remember that the Chicago Public Schools are the third largest school district in the United States, serving just under 400,000 students with 600 plus schools. And there were three really out of the gate challenges that I think the group faced. One was simply one about devices. Do students have access to the kind of devices that they need in their homes to be able to do the distance learning, the online learning that's part of that? And the truth was that a large percentage of our families did not have access to those devices. Add to that broadband wasn't available widely, especially in some of our high poverty neighborhoods. Hence, Xfinity, actually really Comcast, stepped up pretty significantly to create a series of hotspots, particularly on the west and the south sides, to be able to create access for families. I think a second is the one that Pam mentioned, which is the pivot to virtual for teaching and learning, with a teaching force that perhaps is not as well equipped to be able to handle that on a daily basis. And it's not simply adapting what you were doing on a face-to-face basis to the online environment. It's also understanding the nuances of what it means to work in an online environment. And the third piece that Pam picked up on, which I think is really important, I want to give a name to, and that's the idea of helping our youngsters to feel safe, to feel comforted, and simultaneously feel connected. And in our space, we usually refer to that as kind of social emotional learning. It's not as much about the academics that we're trying to teach. If we're trying to teach fractions this week, we're trying to teach something new about character in our literacy work. It's about helping them to feel connected and safe, even in this new online environment that they're working in. Those are big ones, I think, that large systems have had to face.
Just want to go back to something that Pam said too with regard to um, as old people, as fossils, we just assume that all kids know and are techie. And it didn't even dawn on me. Some kids aren't. Some kids don't respond to that or get it. So there's an across the board adjustment on their level as well. And again, in due in part to the fact that they didn't have the device to begin with. So now they've got to learn that whole thing. I'm sure they learned it quicker than we did and do, but nevertheless, there was the startup must have been very tricky.
And the challenge is we weren't right next to them to walk them through all of those steps, where normally if I'm working on a computer with a student, I'm right next to them and I'm saying, okay, click that, try this. We had to work on it across the way. So to help a student who has their mic muted but doesn't know how to unmute it gets to be a big challenge. But also for a student who doesn't know how to manipulate a PowerPoint or to work through a Google slide, it is brand new territory. And what you don't want to have happen is for them to then feel like they're not good at school because they're not able to handle this school. And sometimes that translates when they're in school and now in this new virtual world, and that doesn't leave them feeling safe and secure. And I'm not right there next to them to say, you can do it.
Yeah, that's
that human connection to cheer them on when they're trying something new.
Yeah. What you described about students though, Wayne and Rhonda, I think you could also apply to parents who are often sitting next to them and don't necessarily feel as though they've got the same level of tech skills. I'd speculate that older siblings are playing a really important role in households that have more than 2 children because they are often the coach on the side.
Well, so I'm going to jump forward a little bit because this kind of touches on another question that I had for you. With this happening, as far as online learning and the situation that you spoke about some families just didn't have the means to do it, like the internet connections or the actual devices. And kudos to the companies that put those in places for the hotspots and whatnot. But what issues do you see arising from those situations now once you go back into the classroom? Maybe there were some students or families that couldn't have any access at all. How do you see that playing out?
And there's a real reality to that. And that is happening because we're still trying to make constant contact and still try to get like individual hotspots into homes to make sure that those work. I work on the south side of Chicago and we're still making deliveries of those pieces to try to make it happen. Because not everybody jumped on at first. At first it was, we're home, we're safe. That's good. Then the question of school started to come back around, or they heard from peers that, things were happening online and they were at school. The problem is when we get back, there will be discrepancies about what the experiences were for some students and what they weren't for other students. But we know that. We know that every fall when we come back to school, that there are children that have learned all summer and there are ones who left the door and did not open a book or do anything academic in their whole time when they were off. So our responsibility and one of the greatest opportunities we have is to know that student and pick them up right where they are at that time and launch. And then we have to recognize, okay, I've got from the fall to the spring, early summer, how do I pace that child compared to how do I pace another one to give them the greatest opportunity?
But does that make your job more difficult as a teacher in the classroom? Because now what it sounds like, you're almost individualizing each student's plan versus a whole classroom's plan.
Right. And honestly, the days of whole classroom have started to ebb away really for a longer period of time than I think people realize, because what each student brings to the classroom every year is a variable. New students to the district are always a variable, and that's a significant number in the Chicagoland area. So we have to look at where students are, and then we have to figure out how to pace. So yes, we are individualizing all the time. I work in special education, so by law, and certainly by heart, we individualize for every student because the gaps are so different. They're wide. But even for regular ed students, that personalized learning piece has become really ideal, because then you know each child and you know each pace that you'll set. And yes, you still have to manage a whole class of students. And there are times when you're doing whole class work, for sure. But there has to be individualization for all students, even more so now going into 2021.
So,
One thing that the pivot has done as well is it's really shined a hot spotlight on the inequities that exist across households of the families that we serve.
mhm.
And that has been an issue previously, but as soon as we made the pivot to distance learning and devices as well as access became so important, those inequities just show up all over the place. In my example about neighborhoods without even good broadband access to begin with, let alone devices. So that's one that I'm actually hoping something good will come out of as a result of this, because it's really shined a very, very hot spotlight on the inequities that exist across communities in a given school district as well.
And
Well,
actually, it has. So if I sound like I'm excited, I am excited, because now I hear teammates saying, there can be two of me now in the classroom, because we've learned how to create a mini lesson, and then we can also be physically in the classroom. So I might have a small group who's watching a recording of me or watching like a very animated lesson that I've already prepared for them. Say 12 of the students are working on that. Then I have the access to work with the other 12 or 14 or 16, however many that might be, that might need something very different. So I see teachers saying, I can do this now. I know how to do it. I could use this lesson again. I could improve it the next time and re-record it. So now there's two of me, and never before has there been two of me
right.
in the same classroom, because we haven't used the technology that way. So to see teachers say, I want to do that, versus administrator types sometimes having to say, you're going to do that.
Right.
That's the way you want it to be motivated, because then that's their intrinsic motivation saying, I'm in. This is what my classroom's going to be.
So this brings me to another question then. The parents that may not be as highly educated as other parents, or the parents that may not even speak English, that are sitting there alongside their child trying to help them and guide them through these lesson plans. What do you think that, I can't imagine a parent like that. Must make a parent feel like don't even know how to give guidance to my kid, because I can't even understand what I'm hearing. Are you getting any feedback in regards to parents and their participation?
Yeah.
Feedback, actually pushback as well. Pushback often taking the form of, you're really asking too much of us at home. I've got 3 kids to manage. I'm still trying to work from home. We've only got 2 devices among the 3 kids. That kind of pushback that's occurred from families has been very, very targeted. Once again, the issue of the inequity tends to come up, because you find places where families are really struggling with that internally. Pam's got some great examples of her students that she's finding online at 11 and 12 o'clock at night.
Because that's the only time they can, because parent might be working on that computer during the day to do their job. Then older siblings are bigger and they're getting the computer next.
Right.
Do you expect to see from that situation, that pushback situation, do you expect to see some parents go, just forget about it? You can catch up when you get there, when school starts again. I mean, that's got to be a pressing thought problem as well. How do we compensate for that?
Yeah, and they'll prioritize in their family, and you have to respect that, because they have to make decisions about what is in the best interest of their family unit. And that could be a small family with one little one. We have families 5 and 6 large. So a decision has to be made about when. And honestly, my first reaction was, boy, I wish we could turn it off so the kids couldn't be on that late. And then I thought, oh my gosh, we can't turn it off, because whatever time they can get on, we want them to seize the opportunity. And from the students that I've seen, nobody's making them get on. They're motivated. They're going to find that window of time when it's quiet in the house, they can work and they can get on, and then they go. Mm-hmm. But I'll also drop you a gem on this too. We, in our school district, in the school that I am in right now, we have a significant Middle Eastern population. So there's a huge language barrier. But we're also finding within the tools ways that they will instantly translate. So a teacher can even write a subnote on a Word doc, here's the directions, and they can either translate it in writing into Arabic, or they can translate it in their own voice into Arabic if they know the language. we didn't even know we could do that until 3 days ago. Yeah, so you have these like wow moments of, "Oh, I can put all of what you need right in that document. The parent can hear it, feel like they're a partner with us, and then they're going to stay next to their child to help them work because they are part of the process now."
Maybe later we can tag to that idea, because the truth is we're learning in this pivot some things that are really important about reimagining education and what this might look like in the future. Because we aren't necessarily, in adapting to a new normal, going to go back to the way that school looked.
Right, right. To add a layer to that, after leaving Chicago School District, I know that you traveled the world as a consultant, looking at international situations, international school districts, working with them in the same way that you did in the US. Um, are you, two questions, are you getting any feedback from former colleagues internationally? And do you think there are any countries that were better suited to make this shift, to make this pivot to a technological schooling, teleschooling, if you will? Any thoughts about the rest of the world?
Well, let me take the second half of that actually in a first order. Um, I have been hearing from people, and I've also seen people writing about this from different perspectives around the different countries that I worked with. I would say that in my experience with the 15 different countries I worked with over a period of time, I would say that 13 of those 15 were highly advanced as it related to the use of technology. And they didn't struggle as much with the pivot to distance learning as I think the other two countries did. The other two countries you're not going to be surprised by. They were India and South Africa. And there, the same issues that present themselves as it relates to inequities exist as well. I mean, you can be 400 miles out in the bush, so to speak, in India and not have any access at all to broadband in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
There have been some really interesting experiments done, as a matter of fact, in places like India, where they installed computers in the middle of a town square, brought broadband access to it, and offered no instruction to students. But students figured out how to use the computer, called the hole in the wall experiment. And it was actually replicated in a number of other countries beyond that time, because youngsters can be quite inventive and creative about their use of these things. But I'd say that the other thing where I started, that a number of my colleagues are really trying to write about, there's a social movement underneath all of this, that we could really reimagine school. We don't have to think about school as being 180 days long. We don't have to think about it as being an 8 to 3 kind of a day. We don't have to think about grouping kids in the same fashion by grades, but maybe by age groups instead. All of the conventions that we grew up with as we think about as school are things that can be challenged by the adaptations that we're making that are required because of the pandemic.
Right.
Well, I want to go back and talk about something that you mentioned early on about the children feeling safe. Because a lot of times school is their safe place. Their home life is chaotic. Are you concerned that this time at home will affect them not only in their personality, but also in their learning, because maybe they don't feel safe in their environment where they are?
There's always the possibility of that. And we're mandated reporters. So I have students on screen, but I'm watching to see if there's concern, what I see physically on a student, what I hear from them, what they might report. Parents forget cameras are on, things you see in the background. So parents sign consent to have us in an open Zoom because we're really now present in their home. And you can see things that you wouldn't normally be able to see. I think
I would bet that parents would forget that.
They do.
They think I'm in my home, so I can do whatever.
Yeah, you see things and hear things, you're like, ooh, I'm not so sure you want that on that camera. But they don't realize they're a room away and they don't think you can hear them, and you can. The connection for us with kids is we had to show them that we were still there for them, that we were going to have lessons that connected to what we did before. We were going to expand on things that they had learned, and we were going to make sure that we were still creative and at times fun too. to be able to draw them into what's important to us for them to learn. But we can also have conversations. I have an example of a parent who said to me that their daughter was getting more and more anxious the longer that this was going, and was asking questions like, will I ever see Mrs. George again? And how do I know she's okay? And at that point, we hadn't had any approval for the Zoom meetings. But once we did, I said to the mom, is it okay with you if we meet with her, with my assistant with me, with her individually, just to talk about not her fears necessarily, but to just be the way we are normally together. So we were talking about, new music she was listening to and the outfit she had on, and she had cut her bangs not too long ago, and it wasn't so great, but they were looking awesome. So you make those connections again, and you know that there's a normalcy in that. She knew I was okay. I knew that she was okay. And we could say to each other, we can do this, right? We look how well we're doing. And she had that reassurance. So then when we had her back in the classroom, she had already had that conversation. She wasn't sitting with that angst. So it gave us an opportunity to make that individual contact. And I can't say that all teachers have the opportunity or the supportive families to be able to do that. But when we can, we're pulling people in and pulling, parapros and fellow teachers in to have these individual or small group meetings with kids to say, how are you? Are you okay? Tell me that you are. And if you're not, let us help you to be okay. Because they lean on us emotionally quite often. So it wasn't just going to stop because we were a few towns away.
Yeah. You mentioned one other issue, Rhonda, I want to make sure that we tag too, which is the meta issue of privacy in the use of online tools. I can use an example with you explicitly because Nick, my youngest son, who teaches in a school district just a little bit north of us, they are not using Zoom at all. They have banned Zoom for use because of concerns that parents had about privacy. And that's because you've probably seen and heard a number of stories about meetings that were actually hacked into by people and inappropriate things that were done, which could have been done in any of Nick's small group tutoring sessions. And so they decided to pull Zoom entirely and are using a different platform that they feel offers more protection. And that's something that every school district had to face about what they were going to use, since there are multiple choices out there about what one can use. And Zoom was pretty benevolent in opening up their options for school districts to be able to use them free. So a lot of people jumped on board to begin with. But it's created all kinds of questions on the back end, much like the kinds of questions that have been raised with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and the privacy issues that exist around Facebook.
It's a brave
Does the economic class of a family or a district show signs of who wants to participate in this particular platform, who doesn't really care, who doesn't understand the whole privacy thing, who says absolutely not, I don't want to do that because of the privacy? Do you see that distinction?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would necessarily call it economic class, but I would say that it's people who are more technologically smart about understanding what the problems could be. And they're the ones that often raise the issues that then become a red flag to a school district.
Time out, we're not doing it. But it would be an interesting study to see how that played out and where kids were restricted, where you maybe wouldn't anticipate, like, oh, we have the technology, we have the means, so of course we would do that. Well, then you have highly educated people that have access to IT and other levels of understanding that go, oh, wait, no, you're going to record my child? I don't know who gets that. What are you going to use that recording for later? What if you see something in my house and now you don't know what's going on, but you're making an allegation? Normally you wouldn't be in my house. So there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind that what happened when we switched to distance learning is that we made home visits on a daily basis through the technology. And quite honestly, they did the same thing into your home as a teacher as well.
I'm saying, where? What is?
They did the same thing coming into your home. If you're teaching, they can see, what's in your home.
Right.
So
Right. Well, of course. Right. I see what you're saying.
It goes both ways.
Yeah. This is okay. This would take us out of the distance learning. Learned a new phrase today. And is that the word of the day?
Nope.
No.
Take us out of distance learning and get back to some form of normal. Knowing that you have both been administrators and that you've worked so closely with them all over the globe. Day one, school doors open. What counsel or what advice or do you have what goal would you set for an administrator, knowing all of those souls, all those little friends were coming back through the door? What's the overall picture you paint for your staff and for your class?
There's two sides to that, I would say. Knowing what we know now. I mean, it's evolving as we learn more as we go. But I think one of the things to seriously consider is school isn't a social distance place. We are in each other's bubbles all the time.
Mm-hmm.
By inherent of leaning in to help a student or walking in lines in the hallway, sitting in a class of 26 students, we're around each other all the time. So if we're not afforded that opportunity anymore, we have to rethink everything from the moment a student pops out of a car or a bus, even if that's normal, to how they enter into the classroom, move in the building, interact with each other, what you can and can't do. What we've learned with students is that you have to really be explicit about what you want them to know and be able to do. So I was always amazed when I worked at a junior high further south from the city, that we really had to teach students how to go up and down a double staircase, because they wanted to ride the rail, they wanted to hop 3 steps, they wanted to have fun on the steps. And as adults, we were like, wait, you're going to get hurt. It's a simple thing like that. Show them what they need to do, show them how to be really successful at it, so then they can meet your expectation. But I'll put that aside for a second. I want them to be safe to handle this distancing if we need to have that. But aside from that, I want them to go back to a very caring, supportive, safe zone that they had before. So I don't want school to feel so different that it's now so regimented that we can't have a closeness, even if we can't physically have that closeness. And I always said as an administrator to my teachers, we have all year to demonstrate how to be successful and what we expect them to do. We have from minute one to help them understand how important they are and how much they belong with us and together. And I want that to be this emphasis, because my tribe broke when we couldn't go to school anymore. Like, we have a special bond that no one else can understand except for the students and the teachers in that classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I want them to have that bond back, and maybe even more so now, because I'm worried that they're going to think, are we going to be in school tomorrow? Are we going to be in school next week? And they're going to distance themselves because it's a risk to get close, because it hurts to break it off.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I'm afraid they'll be afraid to kind of tip their toe back into that because it got broken before and it hurt and
Sure.
It was scary. And I want to encourage them to come, dip your toe again and trust me that we're going to work on it. It might feel a little different, but we want you back in the tribe.
Well, and you have to, in that light, you have to be in the back of your mind going, will there be a second wave? And is this a temporary? You certainly don't want to let them know that it's possible, but would the second wave interrupt that? And a corollary question: do you see your type of interaction that you're so passionate about? Do you see that happening with masks on? Is that part of a new normal?
Well, to try to add a little levity to this interview, you heard the story about the woman that went grocery shopping yesterday and was very, very pleased about the fact that everybody in the place had masks on, except that when she got home, she realized she brought home a different husband.
Hey, stuff happens out there. It's a wild, wacky world right now.
So to that end, just to make that connection, my good friend David Jackson, who's London-based with the Innovation Unit, has been writing about the idea that those people that want to reopen schools have either never been in a school or never been around kids.
Right.
Because social distancing and kindergarten don't go together.
Yep.
So the whole notion about what this might look like, and your question to, the day one, I'm not sure that day one is going to look like a usual fall reconvening school. I mean, if I were to try to advise some of my school leaders, I'd have them start to think about the oldest grade in the school that they're working with and actually starting them to begin with, so that you've got some student leaders, even if they're fifth graders who are trying to lead elementary students, about beginning to create the new behaviors that are going to be required in this new normal. And that might mean that you're actually starting school for them in July, with the idea that maybe more kids will come back in August, maybe more kids will come back in September. There are multiple alternatives now being discussed about, well, what will school mean in terms of not the daily schedule that we had, but what the new schedule might look like. What if we actually went to an alternate day schedule so that we had fewer kids? Because in some classrooms, they're already, packed to the gills from wall to wall with 30 students.
Oh, yeah.
And they're a little bit like the party that was broken up in Chicago, where people were shoulder to shoulder. That is absolutely a petri dish for any of these things. And to think about a second wave, Rhonda, as you're suggesting, the possibilities of that happening once again in the fall are really pretty high. So I think kind of on a day-to-day and almost on an hour-to-hour basis, you're going to see officials at the state levels begin to talk about what the different arrangements could potentially be. Mm-hmm. One place to look at this, though, is to look at Denmark, which has reopened its schools for all students under age 12. Interestingly, within an hour of that announcement, there was a Facebook group of 40,000 parents who said, we're not sending our kids back because we don't think we're safe yet. So you're going to have to balance some of those kinds of things, including, will staff members be willing to come back? Will they feel safe enough working in the environment that we know is a germ location, just given the number of kids that you're putting together? Right. So these are big questions that I don't necessarily have answers to. I have some different ways to think about how people are thinking about it.
But I'll throw you just this vision that came across my mind when you asked that question, and probably saw me grimace at that, because I said to Al the other day when I was at the grocery store, now that the vast majority of people are masked, you lose the ability to see expression. Mm-hmm. Like you eyes, and that tells you a little bit, but we look at body language all day long. And if I'm challenging a student or giving him a new opportunity or encouraging him to take a risk when he or she is learning, and I can't see this whole facial expression of what's happening, well, I have lost a significant tool of knowing when they're okay, not so okay, when they're goofing around under that mask. Like there's all kinds of things to think about. And seeing that beautiful face tells me a ton about what they're experiencing. Even when a student walks in first thing in the morning, when you just see what you're so accustomed to seeing and it's different, and then you respond to that. So we would lose a lot of that just in the simple suggestion of something so important like wearing a mask. It would change the way we work with kids.
Do you think when you go back that you will see increased behavioral issues, especially if we go through this again, another wave of it, and there is an extended period where they're home yet again? Do you expect some of that to cause behavioral issues that'll take away from the learning time?
I think so, because then they're not committed to this routine of school that they understand that goes from, say, August for us until, say, Christmas break, holiday break. So they're running the marathon and they know what it takes to do that. If you suddenly have a change in that, even a snow day will throw kiddos for a loop, because it's like, woohoo, like we're free and easy, and now we've got to kind of get back into that routine. But I'll also tell you, there's a marked difference at times with students leading up to what you would think would be a great thing of holiday breaks, because they know that they're going to this unstructured, sometimes unsafe and scary home life for 2 weeks, and they know they're not going to see you or that principal that, gives them a hug every day, or, that coach that is pushing them to do the best that they can. So you already see that in the traditional calendar. With this one, I would think so.
If I could name that too, Rhonda, I'd say that I think that the potential for anxiety will grow with kids. And quite honestly, I think it'll grow with adults as well, both in families about, is it safe to send my child to school? And with professional staff about, is it safe for me to go in there and teach?
Right. What, okay, moving right along, because I had a question and it just escaped me. It was just something totally.
There it goes.
It'll come back to me in a minute. I'm sure it will.
I think we recognize this.
So interesting. It's just, again, same storm, different boat. I had no clue that as a teacher or as an administrator that this was what you guys deal with right now. And so it is, this is why I really wanted to do this podcast, was because I wanted to give an outlet for people to understand what people from all different walks of life are dealing with, because it's not the same for everybody. And so I'm sure that, do you have one right now? Because I'm sure this one will come back to me in a minute.
Well, if it does, I just want to say that part of what we wanted to do this for was to find out how it impacted your personal lives. But I don't mean your personal lives with under your roof, your life within the structure of your careers and so on and so forth. And there's two things I want to say. First of all, we're friends. We know you. This is kind of like, this is an insight here. This is kind of like us driving the 2 or 3 hours to go to gigs, because once we get in the car, the banter just starts, and we're talking on all of these different levels. But the core of it is, if people can hear this and understand how passionate two people like you are about the deep dig down into being a teacher and the connection to the children, the community, the cliche that the kids are our future, they are. Education is so important, so taken for granted. And I hope the more people that hear your ability to dig deep catches on, because teachers should be making 6 figures, not baseball players. I'm sorry. Baseball is a sport, it's fun, it's entertainment, but the balance is so out of balance. And I marvel at the what we've learned just from asking you a few questions and talking through this stuff. And I'm proud to be your friends. I really am.
Thank you.
You didn't
I
get to the
appreciate that very much.
I didn't have a question. That was a statement.
Well,
I wanted to make sure people knew that there's some deep stuff happening right now.
I do want to go back, and Al, I think I'm going to direct this one to you. I heard something on NPR about how heavily universities rely on international students. And they had an interview with an international student who is here right now. Her student visa is going to be up very soon because she completed her 4 years of high school here and then went to 1-year university. And she says, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I have to go back. Can I even get back right now before my visa runs out? And then can I come back? Will I want to? Will my family allow me to? How do you see this? I didn't really realize that universities relied on the tuitions from the international amount of students as heavily as they do.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on that and how you think this will affect international students coming back to America to study?
We should come at it from two perspectives, the educational and actually the immigration as well, which we sort of live through Pam's oldest daughter, Alex, who's a practicing immigration attorney. So on the education side, I mean, there are some institutions that 20 to 25% of their student enrollment is international students. And those students pay full freight plus the typical out-of-state tuition that exists with most states is also a charge that they begin with. And then they have another one on top of that for international students. This is true at both the undergraduate level and maybe even more true at the graduate level, because the US is still a destination, if you will, for advanced degrees. It's not uncommon for some families to decide that they're going to begin sending their children to school in the United States in high school so they can matriculate easily to college. But it's not uncommon as well for people who've earned degrees overseas in another country to actually come here to do their graduate work. My prime example of this is the team I worked with in South Korea, which involved 10 people. Of the 10 people, 9 of them had PhDs from US institutions. And that's because they left home in South Korea to come to school at the University of Michigan, at University of Wisconsin, at Illinois, at Columbia, at Stanford, some of the best places around the country, because those are the sorts of things you want to be able to bring back as far as creds are concerned with what you're going to do. I am concerned that families will begin to wonder, given our statistics among the international pandemic, about whether or not they think their children would be safe from the pandemic here in the United States. It's sort of a reverse issue as it relates to how some people in this country are thinking about immigration, because I don't think that they recognize, as by example, the public doesn't necessarily recognize all of the other essential workers in the food chain, as an example, how important international students are to higher education. But there's an immigration side to it as well.
For my daughter, Alex, I mean, she's been on the front line in her work, and the rules change. So she's trying to adjust to that. And when there's questions about visas, you have to make a long-term commitment for education. It's not usually just in a year, it's multiple years. So you're not only deciding for now, you're deciding, will I be able to complete it as I go through this program? And that has been tearful conversations that she has had with many to make sure that we can help them be assured in our country that they can not only come in, that they can stay and they can complete their programming, and then have potential for work after that too, for some of them, and residencies in medical school and internships with business and those kinds of things. So it's complex. So it's a very good question, because there's so many unknowns in that journey anyway. So then you take it now with these additional layers, and you're asking a lot for the international community to make that kind of a commitment when our answers are changing on a daily basis.
And this particular interview that I heard, this student said, if it's going to be online learning, if I'm going to do my online university studies, I don't even know if I'm going to, I'll just go,
Why be here?
Why be here?
Right.
I'll just go home. And then when I go home, why spend that money to do online learning? You know, I'll just be home with my family and go to university there. It was eye-opening to me to hear that. And again, I had no idea that universities relied that heavily, or at least some of them, on the international students.
And, you know, an interesting or challenge too in that same respect is university professors are not all accustomed to teaching online either. My brother's an adjunct professor for Fairleigh Dickinson, teaching a negotiation and hostage situation course, and we had to convert the whole class overnight.
Wow.
In platforms that I was a little familiar with. He had no training and still has had no training in, but we had to go. Like we didn't miss a week. So there's another teaching population that's making a dynamic shift in how they do their work.
So curious, you just brought up another aspect of the cross talk between institutions and levels of learning, and you helped him put together a program overnight. There's a dozen questions. What was that like? Just what part of what you knew overlapped with what he needed to do for his classes?
You know, the interesting thing, my learning design translated into his course, because we really were committed to making it very interactive, because negotiation is very personal. You're talking all the time through that process.
Right.
It's hard to negotiate. People will shy away from a challenging conversation, especially if the person on the other side is hostile or mentally ill. And those were the scenarios that we were having the students work through. So we were really losing this really rich course that we had developed around experiences they would have not only as a negotiator, but we constructed them so they would translate into their real life too, and would draw that bridge for them. Now in a relationship, how would you play this out? Now in negotiation for a college scholarship, how would you use this skill?
There's a couple slots left in the course if you want to enroll, by the way.
Yeah, where do I sign up?
Where do I
I'm
register?
not sure which. I'm not sure which half I want to be in, the hostage negotiation or the communication part. But being on the bus is kind of like hostage.
No doubt.
Make sure the guys all hear that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I will.
Something just came to me. and I want to say to listeners, we kind of had a game plan for this, and then, you know, as we got into it, we kind of jumped all over. So then questions come to your mind, maybe we're referring back to something else. So I hope our listeners will forgive us for bouncing around. But Al, in your consulting with educational systems literally all over the world, do you think that America can learn something from other uh, ways of educating that you've seen in other countries that may have that now that this particular situation has brought forth where we're really lacking? Do you think there are things that other countries are doing that we could learn from?
When I consider the 10 years that I spent, quote unquote, on the road doing that work internationally, that was the biggest learning I walked away with. We are quite parochial in the United States about how we think what we know is the best of everything. And the truth is, people have figured out other solutions around the world around doing the work that we do that is much more successful than what we do. Some of it has to do with the value bases that exist in communities and in cultures in different countries about how they view education. But some have to do with just really simple technical solutions to how they organize what it is that they do. South Korea, I'll go back to for a moment because it's a great example. South Korea has field trips for their kids, but they're all scheduled on Saturdays. They take up no instructional time during the course of the regular week. And kids go to school 6 days a week to be able to do those sorts of things. Very productive, a whole different feel or a different vibe, if you might, doing it on a non-school day. But nonetheless, a very different use of time. Back to one of those issues about how we think about what the school day should be and how the school day should be structured. Examples from China, which maybe we can get to with Pam's work that she's been doing with VIP as well. They have very often residential schools. You'll find those around the United States, but they tend to be private, pretty high tuition kinds of schools. But they have residential schools built into their system because students aren't able to gain access to the kind of education they need in the rural areas of the country in which they live. They built entirely new kinds of designs for schools to be able to help to address that problem, which for them is an inequity as well. It's a disparity of a different kind that we might talk about in the United States. So absolutely, the answer is we got to look up out of our foxhole and say, what else can we learn from around the world? Because there's a lot of other lessons that exist out there that could help to accelerate what it is we're trying to do. And it shows, by the way, in relation to our performance. If you look at any of the results on international tests, in terms of the performance of our students on PISA, which is an international assessment, we are below the top 10 in mathematics and in literacy compared to the rest of the world. And that says a lot about what's not happening in US education. And in this case, once again, the disruption of the pandemic only exacerbates that problem and creates more of a distance, if you will, about where we'll end up being.
Wow. So kind of adding on to that, maybe not, but this question came to my mind. We have public education and we have private education. But if down the road, well, first of all, do you see that we in America could potentially several years from now go to all virtual learning? And if so, would that take away the public and private education? Would it just all become one? Sorry, that one just came.
I will tell you, it pulls at my heartstrings because the idea of it being all online, you really lose the essence of connectiveness and relationships and a place to belong. And for young people, that's critically important. For adults too, but for young people, it's essential because you have your place to be and that's your place to grow and learn. And you can predict that. You're going to go every year, you're going to go back to school. And although your tribe might shift, you still have these common tribesmen that come back to you and teachers that your older brothers and sisters knew. And there's this sense of community. So this educator heart says, I hope we don't go to all virtual. But I am more than willing to look at a different calendar or a different use of the day, the time, a mixed blended classroom, more personalized learning, which we talked about originally, if that's going to help students be more confident in who they are as learners, as innovators, as designers, creators, because gone are the days of I'm going to teach you these things and then you're going to be fine. For our students now, there's learning, tons of learning to do, but it's what then do they do with it? How do they apply what they know? How do they craft new knowledge? How do they connect with someone else to join ideas to get to a greater end? And that needs connectiveness. You have to be able to get along and challenge each other and give feedback, hear feedback. And to do that at a distance is doable, but there's something I think lost if there's not that human connection piece with it too.
I think, and I actually hope, that one of the things that does emerge from this is more blended learning models that incorporate the use of technology appropriately, but don't try to eliminate what it is that we do in a face-to-face session, because learning is social. The way you learn is by interacting with others in the process. And there are limits to how much you can do that completely online, but it's pretty powerful when you can combine the two of those things together. I'd say that was one of my biggest learnings, trekking back and forth to Alaska over a 10-year period, and to the international work that I did. Those were all blended models. We did a lot of work on WebEx and telepresence, two of the products of Cisco Systems, the technology people. But we also did face-to-face events that were anywhere between 3 and 4 days in duration. So it meant that when we queued up, these were people that I just worked with in South Korea 4 months earlier, face-to-face. And now we're online in a WebEx series of meetings, maybe over a period of 3 or 4 months in preparation for the next face-to-face event we were going to do. Those blended models are much more powerful when you can put those two things together.
Interesting.
So, to touch on what you said, Al, Pam, you work for, in addition to your school, you do online teaching with VIP Kid. Those children, this type of learning scenario comes very natural to them because they are doing it at least weekly. Maybe some of them do it daily or every few days or whatever. Did you see an uptick in that during this time that you've been home? And then B, what can you take away from that and apply to what may be a new norm in your classroom once we go back to school?
You know, for me, when I first started to work with VIP Kid, I had students that were as young as 5, and you would see them come on camera and they'd be like, just stuck, just mesmerized. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And now a completely different language. So these poor little ones, like, scared to death. But what you find is that the more little tiny steps you can take with them, the more they feel a little bit more confident. And that becomes a very involved, connected, belonging place. I mean, I have students now that I would consider like sons and daughters to me. We are, have that kind of relationship. The parents were communicating back and forth well beyond when I'm online with them for half an hour a day or a couple of days a week. So that connectiveness still happens even though we're thousands and thousands of miles away. But the way that happens is you get to know that student. When Alice comes up on camera, I know where she's been and I'm ready. I know where we're going. And it's because of that relationship. So online lessons to me still have to have important people, little people and big people, having that relationship to know each other and to talk about past experiences and future hopes. So I've definitely learned that from that experience. But yes, I did have parents say they were thankful that they were used to the rigor of being online, because that's a different mental intensity to be in an online class versus being in a regular classroom. And they felt like their little ones had built endurance because of their VIP Kid experience.
Interesting.
That may sound a little counter to what I said a minute ago about blended models, but one of the things you got to take into account is the frequency. And you tagged this in your question, Rhonda, about how frequently Pam sees those youngsters. That unto itself, in terms of thinking about the interval, what's the amount of time between, allows you to build a relationship with that youngster. Even in what is a fairly highly scripted program in terms of the way VIP is organized, there is still time and space in there to build a relationship with a youngster. And over time, it's one of the things I've witnessed over the shoulder that Pam has done quite successfully as she has built her business with VIP.
But yeah, but those are sweet babies. The other piece I would say is I want my students to have interaction, because we assume the way we think is the way people think. Unless you hear that other perspective or think, oh, I didn't go after that math problem that way, I'll try that. Or he struggled but he persisted and he got it, so I'm going to persist too. You're able to model and see this race to the top of being an academic champion. And I want my kids to be able to see that. I also want them to see that sometimes when you work hard and you take a risk, you fail. And that's okay too, because you're going to figure out why. So we're dissecting, like, what happened? Why did it not work? What could we do the next time? Johnny's okay because he didn't get it right the first time, but look at him now because he went back and did it again. So sometimes it's not only in our own experience, but it's seeing what happens with others to say, I got that. I'm going to do that too.
Hey, just for clarity, VIP to most means very important person. What does the VIP that you work with, what does that stand for?
That's still the same. Yep, very important people. Just the kids, they're the important people. So
very
it's
important
really
people. Okay, all right.
Is it technically VIP kid?
It's VIP kid. Yeah. VIP.
So
it is teaching Chinese youngsters to speak English.
To speak English.
Right.
So was the bond that you created, let's take Alice. The bond you created with Alice has been completely virtual, but you feel very close to her.
Yes.
Was it harder to get to that closeness with her than it would be in your classroom with one of your children because you're one-on-one, or you're in a physical presence?
You know, that's a good question. I've never really compared them before. With American schools, you see each other more frequently. You're in the same physical space with each other. I'm confined a little bit into my classroom unless I bring things in to show Alice or she brings things to show me, where I can do that a little bit more readily with my students. But the same relationship is built. I have to show care and tenderness to Alice when she's struggling, and I have to be like amazingly excited when she does really great. And I do the same thing for my students. I have to show up. I have to be there every day. When she turns on that camera, Teacher Pam better be there and be ready to go. Same thing in the classroom. I have to be on my game all the time. And I have to do my homework. I'm learning things about the Chinese culture I've never known before. I know things about the city where she lives because they were comfortable to share that with me and say, we're okay with you knowing where we live. Some parents are not. Mm-hmm. So it's that constant exchange of, boy, you matter to me. I'm going to invest. Oh, you're going to invest in me too? I'm coming right back at it. It's that same give, that same love that happens in a classroom, even with the ones that don't want to be so loved. Because I have students that are, running around in the background and they're not looking at the camera and they're dinking on their computer, but I find the way. Like, I find something that gets that student engaged, and I start to build on that to the greatest level I can, because I want them to go, I want to come back to class. Because it's real easy to not turn the computer on or disengage at a distance and not do it. I can't reach them. I can't give them a detention. They're either invested or they're not.
Go to your room actually works well for that situation.
Yeah, they're in the room usually. That's the problem.
Where am I going to send you? So
I want to switch gears here just for a minute. You guys, Al, you have grandkids. Pam, you have one daughter that's on the front line in the immigration side of things. How has this all changed how you interact with your kids and your grandkids? And has this thrown some different thought processes of putting things into perspective and what's important in your own personal lives?
Yes, and yes. We miss our family so much.
We had an opportunity yesterday, actually, in celebrating in a socially distant environment Nick's birthday. Nick turned 42 yesterday. And so we had a chance to interact with the grandkids in this sort of distance kind of fashion. But we did finally have one of the grandkids that came over and joined us, spent a couple of hours with us, Ava did, on Monday. And because the frequency of that for us had really been on a weekly basis, it's been really hard during this 5-week period to be disengaged around that. We FaceTimed. I have done Papa Al story hours. I've actually sent stories to them so that they had something that they could hear,
They're so
and
cute.
they could hear my voice as part of that. Miss Pam and I produced a rap. We asked them to write a rap to describe their day.
So we had
So
to too.
I sat down at the kit, laid a little bit down, and then we put a wrap over the top of it. All those sorts of things have been other ways that we've tried to maintain those connections. But all it does is reinforce for us a real high value that's associated with it. This has been particularly hard with Alex because she's had a really demanding work schedule. And actually, Kaylee, Pam's younger daughter, she's kind of frontlining as well because she's working in a grocery store. So she's part of the food chain issue.
Right.
Yeah.
That, along with working with a vet, she's working in a veterinary hospital, trying to help take care of animals during this period of time. She's in the front line here in a different kind of way. And we finally got to see her last week for over a meal. She came over for lunch one
We
day.
fed her. So she came over.
But it does. It is a, gosh, it's hard. I think it's just, it's hard because we've always been so busy, and you just see people when you can, and you fit it in, and you go. And I don't want to say we take for granted that we can just go, hey, I'm coming over, but we kind of do. We just do what we want to do. So this has been really hard. Do the little grandkids, do they understand? Do they question? Are they afraid of the situation?
Should describe what happened on Monday afternoon.
Well, when the decision was made that Ava could come over, because she's an only, so for her,
4 years old.
she doesn't have any other littles around, and it was mom and dad. So, a challenge for everybody, because that was completely different for them as well. Loved every minute of it, but it has its challenges too. So we arranged it. We talked about how it would work. Ava was, helped to understand how it would work. Do we hug? Do we not? Do we sit close? Do we not? And she was all in, and she's always been with us. Like, she was ready to sleep over, I think, before her parents were ready to have her sleep over. So she's go. She gets to the door and she hesitated. She's like, Mom, I'm not going in. She has never, not once, ever hesitated
Wow.
to that door. And I thought, okay, we're at a moment right here. And I thought, okay, I can't not physically be close to her. So Mom gave her a gentle little nudge, and I gave her a little reach, and I hooked her in the door. And she came. She and then we never had another conversation about it. But she was making a decision at that door, and she needed us to show her as adults, we got you. You're good.
It's okay.
But yeah, she felt it.
And on a large scale, that's what you're going to have to do on day one.
It is, as a matter of fact.
Everybody else
It's not
is-
only going to be with students, it's going to be with staff as well.
Sure. Yeah.
What would you say, but I would like to have both of yours opinion. What would you say to seniors because they're missing out on so much?
Well, this is Pam's because, of course, she spent part of her life as a high school assistant principal.
Yeah. There are so many beautiful traditions that we have for kids when it's like you do the hard work and then the celebration at the end. So part of it is like, I'm going to do this because I want to be at prom, or I want to have cords around my neck at graduation and make my family proud. And those opportunities are going to be so limited. Now, the high school that we're in, the district where we live, they've put out a high school graduation date out in July. So they're still trying to put a ray of hope out there that the seniors can have a little piece of that.
Mhm.
But they're truly, you can watch them in the stages, they're mourning, because you can see them in disbelief. You can see them angry. You can see them negotiating. Well, if we do this now, can we do it later? I mean, it walks down that very similar path of, if you lose somebody, what do you emotionally go through? They're losing some things that were really a promise that we as a culture made to them and said, this is what will happen when you get to the end of your career. But I also see towns rallying because I was in Chicago Ridge in the district where I work, and there are senior banners everywhere, just these great pictures of kids. Now, the billboards aren't advertising businesses, they're advertising seniors. So their pictures are up and well wishes from their families are up. And so they're trying to go at it, a little bit in a different way. Signages on, the door, a senior lives here, honk when you go by, like those kinds of things. Now, it's not going to replace what they lost, but I think as a culture, we're saying, how else can we put a big hug around these guys and help celebrate. They did a significant thing to get through high school. We want them to feel special during that time. So I think we'll keep trying to find creative ways to do that.
I'd say that kids are resilient as well. And so they have figured out, quote unquote, kind of the workaround for some of these things. You can't go by a high school parking lot without finding kids that are socially distancing, interacting with each other.
In a circle,
Really?
in the back of their parents' minivans with the hatch up, sitting, talking. But interesting that they went to the high school to do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's not happening out here. Of course, it's quite warm in the parking lot of the high school out here right now. But everybody's staying. I think everybody's staying away from the big buildings.
One other question. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, my question is, can we do a round 2 with you guys? We've already taken up well over an hour of your time. But I want to connect it to. We're going to be in these boats for a long time, and the closer we get to the shore and getting out of the boats, there's going to be all kinds of new adjustments too. So there's certainly going to be time to do this again.
Yeah, our guess would be that by the time you get to the middle to the end of June, there'll be a whole new set of scenarios we'll be talking about.
Yeah.
Probably.
Related to how one thinks about what's
And not only that, when we do round 2, I want to talk about, because you spend time in the city versus the suburbs, I want to talk about a little bit about what's going on in the city. And
They're very interesting people, these two.
I told you.
It's going to take a
I
while
told
to
you
get
this
it all
wasn't
out
going to
of
be
them.
30 minutes.
The other thing I want to make sure of is that for round 2, we're not in the
I
heat
know.
lamp. I feel like a French fry at
Well,
Danny's right now because the sun's going down in Arizona. We will find a new location for
on a
that.
tan.
I feel like I have the old bottle of orange fake tan. Oranger and oranger, if that's even a word.
That might not be fitting for
Post this interview, we do expect that you'll come back with a word of the day, because there was one.
But how would we know? There was such eloquence coming from Lyle. How are we going to know?
I told you it was all part of the educative process, and you told me it was all part of the show.
Here we go.
So you'll have to listen to the recording and come back.
I have to listen to every word you said again now.
That's a tall order.
No,
my
you
friend.
can go fast.
Oh my God.
You'll see.
Can't speed through it, Al.
The
Because
prosodic element I will have offered when I said the word.
you could have said the word, and if I sped past it, I would be.
That's why I said watch. I don't have a mask on, so watch the facial expression as well. And I said it more than once.
So you
That was the hint.
you dropped some hints there, did you?
I
All right.
said it more than once as well.
Oh, boy.
Just in case
Word
you were a
of the
little
day.
slow.
Keep rearing its
Beautiful head.
beautiful head. Speaking of beautiful heads, it's great to see you guys.
Yes.
And thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
for
Thanks for
participating
making us part of this.
so eloquently to our series.
Oh, thank you.
We'll let you know when it's posted.
And we will do it again.
Yeah, I want heavy metal theme music to start the whole thing, though. Would you?
No.
Al, this is not your show.
It's all in the way to run the
We're
show.
gonna have a little, just a little light, probably a bread song.
There you go.
Take care, you guys.
See you guys. Thank
All
you.
right. I'll
Talk
see you
to you
later
soon.
this week, my friend.
Thank
Bye.
Thanks,
you. Stay
guys.
safe.
Bye.